Hello everyone, I'm here to talk about how leaders build culture within organizations, specifically how they build it, and then if they have to, how they change it. Changing it is harder than building it, so that's a bit of a theme in my presentation. I am just graduated from my MSc in Organisational Behaviour here at the LSE. I'm currently working for a company called Zenetta, based out of Oslo in Norway, where we're building a benchmarking tool for the $200 billion containerized sea freight industry. So it's quite different. I'm going to talk about my own experiences with culture, what culture is, why it's important, how to change culture, and how to build culture. So a bit about with culture. Before I went to university as an undergrad at UCL. So I'm currently working in a startup with very informal clothing attire. I can basically do whatever I want as long as I deliver really well results. My office looks something like this. Before I went to university, before I went to UCL for my undergrad, I spent time here on the ship. This is the Norwegian Coast Guard vessel Nordkapp, and I lived with 50 other men in the bottom of the ship, right there. They are very, very different cultures within very different organizations. But what I found fascinating were the similarities between the two of them. They both had a very clear purpose. One of them was to defend a country. The other one is to grow a technology into a massive company. They both have uniforms. One of them is very formal uniform. The other one is a hoodie. But they both have uniforms. There's a way you're supposed to dress that communicate what department you're part of, what you work with, what you do basically. And there's a very pronounced way of thinking. There's a very clear idea of what you're supposed to do when you're in this organization. So there are actually more similarities than what it might seem between the two of them. Culture can very easily be described as the way we do things around here. It's the subconscious, tiny and big decisions one continuously has to make in order to function well in an office. But since this is an academic setting, and we're doing this as an academic institution, I'm going to give you the formal definition, which follows Shine 2010, which says that culture is a pattern of shared basic assumptions. It's learned by a group as it solved its problems of external adaptation and internal integration, which has worked well enough to be considered valid and therefore is taught to new members as the correct way to perceive, think, and feel in relation to these problems. Culture matters because it drives behavior. It's a leadership tool that's extremely hard to master because what the culture of a company is usually differently perceived within different branches and by different people within the same organization. And it can even be down to the individual level. So people within the same branch of the technical department can have a different idea what the culture of a company is. But at the same time, nothing can drive behavior in a way that benefits an organization like culture can. And having a strong culture is usually considered a good thing. But too strong a culture can also make change harder in the face of industry volatility. Why is this important? As Peter Drucker, the Austrian original management consultant, said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. It makes everyone sort of have the same idea of where the organization wants to go, and so you don't actually need to tell people what to do all the time. People are much more proactive at work. This is called normative behavior. It's usually considered an asset, but it can also lead to subcultures that have conflicting worldviews. So the basic definition is operators, executives, and engineers. So these three groups make up the bulk of most companies. The operators are the people that usually sell the product, whatever your organization does. The executives are the people in charge, and the engineers are the people that make sure the organization can still exist. These three groups together make it harder to innovate because they disagree with each other. They all have different worldviews. But if they have a common purpose, they have a common culture, a baseline common culture that really will help them. Their worldviews will be different, but their goal will be the same, so it will be much easier to compromise between the two of them. As Shine 1990 said, once a group has many subcultures, its total culture increasingly becomes a negotiated outcome of the interaction of its subgroups. You cannot get all these subgroups to work together in a perfectly harmonious way, but you can make them work together towards a common goal. But you will always have a difference between sales and engineering. This is the Iceberg Model of culture. So at the top of culture, you have observable artifacts. These are the things you see within an organization that really mark the organization out for what it is. It's having all the doctors having coffee together on Monday morning in a hospital. It's uniforms in the military. It's the things that really make the organization visually what people perceive it to be. As an iceberg, you have 90% below the surface. Because more important than the observable artifacts are the values and norms. These are right below the surface, and people will usually tell you about them very quickly. An example of a value and norm is public sector, is the greater good of the country. But most importantly are the basic underlying assumptions of a company. These are the things that are so ingrained in the culture of a company that they aren't even thought about as something people have made choices to believe in. An example of that is within, for instance, a Chinese firm, the respect for elders is a basic underlying assumption. In Chinese culture, that's very strong. So that is an underlying assumption of most Chinese companies. Culture change is very hard if a bad culture has developed. The best is always prevention. It's building a good culture from the start. Most importantly is who you hire and who you fire. What kind of people actually make up the organization? That will universally determine how things get done. What leaders pay attention to is also what builds culture. So how leaders react to a crisis, how they allocate resources, the deliberate modeling, teaching, and coaching, so how they structure the world around them, and how they allocate status and rewards. All of these are very important for understanding culture. Erratic behavior on the part of the leader leads to the same behavior from his or her employees. It's like parents and kids. If you have erratic parents, you'll get erratic kids. If you have erratic leaders, you'll get erratic coworkers. As an example of this, if you say that you are an open, transparent organization, and all decisions are done in a closed room with absolutely no input from your coworkers and the people below you, you will not have an open and democratic organization. You will have a closed off, difficult organization to penetrate. Culture change. My primary message is do not try culture change. It's extremely hard, transformational, and psychologically painful. It is much better to build a good culture from the start. It requires active and direct leadership. It requires more effort than one can imagine, but it is possible. It's absolutely possible, but as I said, it's hard, transformational, and painful. Rule number one of culture change is one does not talk about culture change. Culture change is something that happens while one does something else. So if one wants to change the culture, one has to change the basic underlying structures of the company, how things get done, who you promote. These are the things that will change the culture of a company. If you are a big incumbent industry firm and you hire an outsider as, for instance, from a big tech company as your head of transformation and internal change, that signifies you're serious about technological change. Saying you're serious about technological change will not lead to changes in technology within the company. It's action that breeds culture. Culture does not breed action. Culture is something that can only be formed while one is working on a different problem. This is absolutely essential to understand in culture. Lewin has 3 stages of organizational change. These are unfreezing, moving, and refreezing. Shine, again, the scholar I'm quoting quite a lot today, has changed this to unfreezing, learning, and internalizing within a company. Unfreezing. In order to change the culture, you have to declare a crisis. That is the leaders and the CEO's prerogative in any organization, is to declare a crisis. You increase survival anxiety with data. So you show them literally why this organization won't exist in 5 years unless you change things. You create a compelling vision of the future. So the organization won't exist in 5 years if we do this, but if we do this differently, we'll be an amazing growing organization and we'll all have big paychecks and go to Spain and have a good time. And last but not least, how the pain of the change will make all of this worth it. Unfreezing is hard. I think it was the former CEO of Samsung that said he has created an air of constant crisis. So he had an organization in constant flux. So you could always change the culture and do new things. But that is also maybe not what people want to work for. Learning. The leader must activate others. It's impossible to change culture by yourself. You always have to bring others on board and then spread the change through them. The goals must be clear, but that you must allow an independent approach. You cannot tell people how to get to their current target, just what the target is. If they're very wrong, you can correct them, but as much as you can make it native to people themselves, how the cultural change is coming from themselves, the better it is, because the more they feel they're part of it. It requires active leadership. The change must be perceived as genuine. You have to walk the talk. You always have to do what you're telling everyone else to do. Saying that the company's in the midst of big cuts, you need to restructure the entire company, and then going for big lunches every day and spending £150 on your company's credit card will be perceived and seen as the coworkers as disingenuous and will make the change harder. Internalization. This is probably the part where most companies fail. It's very easy to set up a big change process. It's not very easy, but it's attractive. It shows poise. It shows that you're proactive. Internalization is, I'm going to go back on that. Setting up a big change process shows proactivity and change willingness on the part of the leader. Enacting it within an organization is you're doing what you've planned. It's not that hard. Internalization is the maintenance, perceived to be probably the most boring and the least attractive for a leader to do, but it's the most important. It's making sure and hammering that change in. It's dependent on a positive result. So people must genuinely feel that the change has made their everyday life better. If there's not a positive result, people will revert back to the old ways. It's a continuous process. It's through recruitment, initiation, and compensation must reflect the new future. You cannot pretend you live in the past. You have to live in your own version of the future, where the recruitment, initiation, and compensations must reflect the new future. And it's a never-ending and evolving process. So going back a bit, unfreezing, learning, and internalization are the 3 stages. But in a big organization, to do this properly, you probably have to do this twice, because you have to unfreeze, learn and internalize your key stakeholders within the organization, and then start all over again and then unfreeze, learn and internalize everyone else within the organization. So it's a big, big process. Thanks for listening. Feel free to connect with me if you enjoyed this on email. Just email me and let me know it was cool or bad. edvardnore@gmail.com. And my nickname on Twitter is @EdvardNore. So thank you so much for listening.